minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Kush'S Korner here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, the coolest reptile network in the world. Just a solo episode tonight, having a topic to talk about that I think is pretty important and pressing to the entire reptile industry at the moment, and that is the state of the current market, why we have kind of gotten into this slump as of late, and how I think we can get out of it. But before I get into that whole topic, as always, USARC. So for those who do not know, USARC is the organization that is fighting for our rights to keep our reptiles, to run our reptile businesses, and to pursue this means of life. Check out usarc.org for all of the relevant information you need to know about the organization. And if you are not already a member, please look into becoming a member. As a community, we have strength in numbers, and the more people we have behind the cause, the better. And tonight we are brought to you by Juggernaut Reptiles. Elijah Armas, one of the leaders in the blood python and short-tail python world, producing some of the highest end examples of those species. Not only do they work with bloods and short-tails, they work with ball pythons, green anacondas, Sanzinia, a number of other species as well. But particularly for the bloods and short-tail pythons, check out Juggernaut Reptiles on all forms of social media. We are also brought to you by Blake's Exotic Feeders. If you are here in the United States and are looking for quail to feed to your reptiles, please check out Blake's Exotic Feeders. They hand raise everything in their facility here in the United States, so you know you are getting a high quality product from a good US based source. Once again, for feeder quail, check out Blake's Exotic Feeders. And last but certainly not least, we are brought to you by the Reptile Super Show. The next Reptile Super Show is coming up in Pomona, California on January 11th and 12th. One of, if not the largest reptile show in the country. One of my personal favorites at an amazing venue, great promotion. They really do an incredible job with this show. I definitely hope to be there myself, potentially have some animals out on the table. And there are hundreds of other great breeders that attend this expo. Definitely one to travel for if you're out of state. If you are in California, the Reptile Super Show is a no-brainer. So check out the Reptile Super Show's website for all the relevant information. Once again, January 11th and 12th is the upcoming show in Pomona, California. And here we are. It is Wednesday night, and I'm back here just ranting for a little while. So if anyone in the comments or in the live chat wants to out, it'd be greatly appreciated. But yeah, this is a topic that has been something I've been thinking about for quite a while, and especially after hearing the episode that MJ and Emilio did last week on the ball python market, I thought that this was probably a good time to get into this, kind of branch off of what they were talking about. If you guys didn't listen to that episode already, I would greatly recommend you checking that out, as they mostly discussed how this topic relates to the ball python game. But it definitely is not only affecting ball pythons. I think, I don't think I know, for the past few years, the reptile market as a whole has not been what it was in the couple of years leading up to COVID, and then 2020, and then a little bit of fall off into 2021, early 2022. This was coming. I think we can all admit that, the reptile market is definitely cyclical, and especially with reptiles, being a luxury good, you don't need reptiles. We don't need to be doing this. We'd love to do it. We want to do it. But when money gets tight and it's either, okay, I'm going to pay my bills, buy groceries or buy reptiles, it's a pretty obvious choice there. And obviously in the US, the economy has seen better days. It truly has seen worse days as well, especially as of really recently. But COVID took a toll on the entire world, and there's really nothing that anyone could have done about it, especially nobody in our industry. But the increase of buyers, of breeders, of everything during COVID, it was at a fever pitch that inevitably was going to boil over, and we all kind of collectively saw that happen. Lock everyone in their house and give them stimulus checks, and give them unemployment and nothing else to do, and endless hours of YouTube videos to watch. Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense why the reptile market blew up as much as it did. Particularly markets like ball pythons and reticulated pythons, many others as well. But those are two that to me really stood out during that period of time. And as we all know, or those of us who have been doing this for a long time, there's a level of attrition with new keepers and particularly new breeders that always has existed. The new guy who is going to come in and get the new biggest and best collection and run everyone else out of business, and then a couple of years in they realize how much work this is, and they realize how much it hurts when your most anticipated clutch goes bad in incubation, or your female gets egg bound and dies, and the adversity that comes along with being a snake or reptile breeder in general. And then inevitably, when they've decided they don't want to do this anymore, well, where do all those animals go? They got to go somewhere. And those people who bought those big collections, they want to make back as much of their money as they'd like to. And, they're not going to make it all back, but they're definitely going to prioritize that monetary return kind of over what happens to those animals, what happens to the market, they're not looking 5, 10, 15 years ahead. They're looking to recoup their investment that they made, not knowing that they weren't going to want to do that in a couple of years. So what that not only caused was this inflation of the market, the prices to go up, availability to go down, the customer base to grow greatly, the scarcity factor being much more prominent during that time. It didn't only create kind of a plateau of the industry and of the market, but it created an overabundance of animals, and honestly an overabundance of older animals as well, which are not always really what everyone's looking for in a particular market. They're not always the most marketable. But then on the flip side, that creates an opportunity for somebody who does know what they're doing and is really in this the way that a lot of us are, to get a jump on a new project for their breeding, and to be producing those animals a whole lot sooner in much higher numbers, and creating an even greater overabundance of supply in the market. And during times of that abundance, I feel like in almost anything, but definitely in reptiles, there's this feeling that you can't produce enough, or you can't sell enough, you can't flip enough to provide for your customers. And that definitely can be the case at particular times. But then those eventually run out. And not only do the new customers run out, but now they're producing their own stuff. And now you've created your own competition. You've created your own competition within your customer base, but then sometimes you are still, if you are that person who has where we're doing it in the first place, you have still been burdened with the load of carrying that market. One thing that a lot of people struggle with and sometimes kind of neglect, to put it that way, is doing their own promotion. That's another thing that during COVID was a lot easier. A lot of people were either not working or working from home or working a reduced schedule. So there was a lot more time to dedicate to social media. TikTok was blowing up during that time. Whatever that might have looked like. There were a lot of YouTube channels back then that are no longer going, and more buzz about the industry, more buzz about the animals, more buzz about what you are doing on an individual basis is going to bolster that market. It's going to bring your customers to you. It's going to, it's going to create a larger pool of people to draw from. And, unfortunately, especially with the way that the world is in today's day and age, if you're not out there, if you're not making yourself be seen, you're not going to be seen, and you're frankly going to be forgotten about. And that's very unfortunate. But I even find myself doing it where I'll see a post from somebody who I'm like, I don't know if I've actually seen anything that they've posted in 2 years. Click on their page. They're posting frequently, and I'm just not seeing it, or they're posting monthly, or they're still around. And the algorithm has curated itself to that maximum clicks, that your attention is going to go to that, and oftentimes to the detriment of the person whose algorithm that is, because now you're not actually seeing what you would have liked to. Or back in the days of Instagram being chronological, and before the algorithm took over, honestly, you were seeing a lot more of what you truly wanted to from the people you actually wanted to back then. And that makes it difficult, because now in today's day and age, there are different criteria for how to hit the algorithm with your content and all that stuff. And honestly, I'm not very good at that, and I'd like to be. But if you're not up on all of that, then your exposure is going to be diminished. And as the world kind of came back around and people started going back to work, and also as the market started to kind of settle down a bit, I feel like, and rightfully so, lots of people who were very vocal, public, they were promoting themselves during COVID or even before COVID, that kind of decreased. And like I said, rightfully so. If you're working more, you're, whatever, even things you were not doing in COVID now are a higher priority for you now that you can do them again, whatever it may be. They're just not promoting their collections, their businesses quite as much as they used to be. And that also leads to a decrease in how that's going to do. It's just it's an unfortunate truth of what happened. And one thing that MJ and Emilio touched on in their episode that is very true, and really, really something that is hard to look at and really hard to process, but we are really feeling the effect of losing Brian Barczyk. More than just from a personal standpoint of losing such a great person, for me, losing someone who I considered a friend, and many, many people considered friend, much closer than me. We lost the main voice of the industry. And lots of people, I don't want to say lots of people, but there were people who had differing opinions on Brian and his content in particular, really not as much about him, more about the content. And the argument from the other side of it is he's bringing more people into the industry than anybody ever has before. And it's, that side has been proven correct, unfortunately. There's other YouTubers who, frequently are putting out content. They have big platforms, like, Snake Discovery in particular is probably the one I would look at as like the number two, or was the number two when Brian was around, as far as, channels with their reach and their ability to bring in new people. And truly, from the way I see it, no one has really stepped up to fill that void. And a lot of the YouTube content that is out there these days, are from people who I wouldn't put at the forefront of how we're promoting ourselves and, the best foot forward for the industry, which is really unfortunate. And as a result of that, I think that the engagement in the hobby has really dropped significantly. And like I was saying earlier, kind of that coinciding with some changes in the economy and just life in general, it put us in a pretty difficult situation. I think another thing that is probably affecting us currently, I know it affects my kind of day-to-day, how I just choose to live my life and what I do. But an election year is always a time of uncertainty. And especially when, there's lots of tension building around said election, you as somebody who participates in the economy are probably going to be a little more withdrawn during that period of time, while there are so many question marks out there about everything. And again, rightfully so. I mean, I'm the same way. I'm, right now is a time of uncertainty, and it just is what it is. You can't really, doesn't matter what side you're going for or what your opinions are. It is what it is. But I think that, coupled with not having Brian around anymore, has decreased the number of, all right, we're not gonna deal with this. We're gonna take you out. Some people are so toxic for the industry that their names shouldn't even be mentioned. That's all I will say. And I'm not even sure why you're here in the first place. So, bye. Okay. Anyway, now that that's over with, took me by surprise. All right, this is the fun of live podcasting by yourself. Like I was saying, with no one really stepping up to fill the void that Brian left, now we have a decrease in new people that are coming into the hobby, and we're all, everyone's feeling it. With that said, though, there are certain markets that are still flourishing and will continue to. And I think the main one that, at least that it crosses my radar on the most frequent basis, and I know it's more than just this, but the green tree python and emerald tree boa market is one that is still flourishing, and for a number of reasons. One, they're incredible animals. They're beautiful. I don't, especially on this channel, I don't need to talk too much about the virtues of green tree pythons and emerald tree boas. There are many episodes, I think one a week at least, that talk about those animals. But they're of a moderate size. They're easy to keep. Especially if you get captive bred animals, and a lot of the people who are breeding them are very public and forward. I give MJ a lot of credit for using this platform to really promote those animals, and not in a salesy way. It's really just showing them for what they are, for having people on who have been passionate about them for years. I mean, having people like Marshall Mendez and Bill Stiegel on the Tuesday night show on a routine basis, that's the top tier information that you can get, and putting it out there as frequently as they do to an audience that keeps coming back to it. That's how these markets get made. Brian was doing it on a scale of having much more exposure, especially back in the days of snake bites, when YouTube reptile content was really very few and far between, and high quality, high production value reptile content was almost unheard of. I mean, really, snake bites revolutionized how we interact with the internet as reptile enthusiasts. So, like I was saying, like this channel in particular does a tremendous job promoting those animals, and also like with ball pythons and everything else that's done here on the channel, but particularly with green trees and emeralds, where keepers that are specializing in another species will listen to these episodes. Maybe they were brought to the channel by ball pythons. They stuck around for some green tree python and emerald talk, and now they're digging, they're scrolling on MJ's Instagram page and seeing all the different localities and designer lines of the green trees, seeing the captive bred emerald tree boas. And what another thing that they do great with is dispelling a lot of the rumors of history within those species of they're difficult to keep, they die easily, they're finicky, you can't feed emerald tree boas big meals, you can't spray green tree pythons, all of these things that a new keeper might hear about a species and might immediately just dismiss them as a possibility, because that just doesn't seem like something they want to deal with. Well, if you peel the layers of the onion back a little bit and realize the green tree pythons, how big of an issue nidovirus was, and the destruction that it levied on on almost all of them in the country in the mid 2010s, And now that we're past that, we've learned about it. We've learned how to manage the virus. We've learned how to test for it. And we truly learned that it's actually not, it's not the end of the world if you know how to maneuver it. That makes a huge difference. But if somebody isn't privy to that new information, because that's not something that they're constantly checking up on, then how are they going to know? So a podcast like MJ's that brings in a lot of new people, has a lot of people who listen for ball pythons, they hear that information, that might flip the switch back on in their brain as far as checking out a snake like a green tree python. Or with emerald tree boas, the whole chronic regurgitation syndrome, this, that, and the other thing. Now that they're being captive bred on a more regular basis, people are working with imports who are really very qualified to do that, establishing them well, and then able to offer captive bred individuals to the potential new buyers. That's creating a really a market that is emerging very quickly, and one with demand that can't be met by the current supply, which is kind of where you want to be. You want to have enough of a market to where you post up that animal, or maybe not even have to post up that animal, but as soon as you decide to make this animal available, you have people who've been waiting on you for a little bit to do such, make such a thing available. And then that, they post that they have this new animal from you. They might have 10, 15 new people that didn't even know who you as the breeder were. So from your customer, you have new eyes on you. From that customer who's now posting about their new projects, how they're trying to advance it, what their plans are for breeding in the future. All of the talk, all of that just stirs up excitement. And truly, excitement is, I feel like, the thing that a lot of us are missing right now. And I can't really put my finger on exactly why. And I've heard it from other people too, where they're just saying like, there doesn't seem to be a level of excitement about the reptile hobby in general as there was a few years ago. I think there's, like I was mentioning earlier, just about current economic situations, I think that there's a reason to be. But the reptile market has done the roller coaster over the years, and it always has come back up. And I have no reason to think it's not going to come back up again this time. But I think at this kind of crucial moment, there's an opportunity to evaluate what got us here, and then figure out what mistakes can be corrected for the path forward. Let's see, I have some notes I've made for myself, because doing all this off the dome is not particularly easy. So with that said, about those being particularly strong markets, I think two markets in particular, and that two that I feel more comfortable talking about, that have done this and did that back down pretty hard, were ball pythons and reticulated pythons. So the ball python market has kind of always done this, and it is truly the staple of the reptile industry. So I'm not here to say the ball python market is going to go away or it's crashing. But it kind of is the yardstick for the entire rest of the industry. And during COVID, the ball python industry is what led the charge, what led all the, what brought in all the new keepers. And it had a run there where it was like, oh my God, this is insane. I mean, snakes were selling for 3-4 times what they were even a year and a half previously. And when that was happening, I was looking at this, thinking to myself, like, this is going to reach a boiling point at some point. I think this, the pot's going to boil over. And the one of the historic issues with ball pythons has been that the pitch is always the dream of being the breeder, that the pitch is not necessarily always about the animal. And I think that, and I've mentioned on here before, how I think that has a limit to where, when that's the only reason why you're selling somebody on this animal, as soon as that might not be achieved, or seems out of reach, or seems that there are a number of obstacles that would be in one's way before they get there, then that is the first step of getting out. And there were a lot of people who had their ball python business that they were starting during COVID, and a lot of us saw it. And I'm at this point, I'm totally on the outside. At the time, I was still breeding ball pythons, but not nearly at the level that some people were. And, you know, I'm like, okay, this could be a problem. My hope was that a lot of people who got into it were going to stay the course and then, you know, find other interests, kind of expand their knowledge base. But inevitably, a lot of people did. And inevitably, there are people in this, you know, watching or listening to this right now who this would apply to. And with that side, there was also the flip side of people who got in, built their collection, and got out. Like I was saying earlier, that creates this flooding of the market of these kind of secondarily sold animals. There are establishment people within the ball python industry that will be at that level forever. They're never gonna drop off. They do a lot of business overseas, a lot of business in the Asian market, and they're good. But then kind of that secondary market of people who are buying from them and potentially selling their collection in the future or breeding and selling those offspring, it's a bit of a different story. And it's one where I always kind of encourage people to find their own lane instead of following what others are doing, whether within ball pythons, that being finding your morph or your combo or whatever you want to do that is your thing that you don't see other people doing, and finding your lane that way, promoting this morph that is underappreciated, however it may be, or with another species altogether, which I think is far easier to do, and I think also probably a little bit more fun depending on what that species is. But kind of creating something out of nothing with reptiles is a bit easier than trying to stand out from the pack when you're one of thousands. And especially when you're one of thousands in a field where there are people who have 4 decades on you, and they're surely not going anywhere. So with that said, though, I'm not here to trash the ball python industry or the ball python market, but it is definitely a truth of this conversation is that the roller coaster ride up very fast and then the more subtle drop off since in the ball python market has created a situation of overabundance and oversupply. Another market where similar trends have occurred is in the reticulated python market. And, you know, especially with the super dwarf reticulated python movement and everything, that was kind of bubbling up pre-COVID, and it was already gaining lots of popularity. And there were, you know, a few people who were really behind it, really pushing it hard, and for good reason. I mean, I think that, you know, I think the pitch, I don't like using that word pitch, but really the talking points of those snakes were, hey, we all love these reticulated pythons. We love all the morphs. You know, they're beautiful snakes. They're engaging. They're fun to interact with. But the size that they achieve is prohibitive of, they won't say this, I'll say it, probably at least 99% of all reptile keepers. So let's take these beautiful snakes, shrink them into this smaller package, and make this a lot more obtainable for most people. And that's a great cause. It took off for a reason. You know, when I was younger and I was getting into all of this, obviously reticulated pythons were something that I had looked into, I was interested in, and caught my eye. The morphs were beautiful. The snakes seemed really intriguing. But, you know, especially being a teenager, I'm like, okay, this snake that can get 15 feet long on average, maybe even more, you know, there's no way I can do this. Well, make that snake under 10 feet long, it's a lot more achievable. And it was marketed very, very well. But it was marketed well, but it was taken advantage of by some people where, you know, you can't tell what these snakes are when they're little. You know, you can't sell somebody a 15-foot retic and say that it's a 50% Calatoa or whatever. But you can sell them a little normal baby and say it is. And you can lie about lineages. You can, you know, pump up a lineage that isn't actually coming from stock that has traceable genetics. Another thing that was done with those snakes that was, I think, pretty detrimental was kind of the misnomer that they will only get 5 feet long or something like that, or 6 feet long, with the example of like a female on eggs at 5 feet long. Well, that sounds great, but what that fails to mention is that is not an adult. That's an adult snake from a maturity standpoint, is not an adult snake from a growth standpoint. Reptiles, almost across the board, can breed at a far smaller size than they will mature. So if you are saying, hey, look at this 5-foot female reticulated python sitting on a clutch, this is how big they get, evidence being it reproduce. It's like, okay, well, I've seen, I mean, we've all seen it as breeders, you know, even with ball pythons, you know, people can have a ball python lay eggs at 1,200 grams. Well, next year she'll be 1,600 grams. The following year she'll be 1,900 grams. And that's not a pitch of ball pythons. It doesn't need to be, because they're not that big of snakes. And another thing of where the retic market went wrong with that, for you know, to the best of my knowledge and of the thousands of snakes that I've seen, there's no such thing as a 5 or 6 foot reticulated python that's fed well. You know, that animal is that size because it is not fed enough, and that's you know, that's not good. You know, promoting taking poor care of your animals for the sake of having a more marketable product is terrible. It's and it's not even that it needed to be done. Like a 7-foot or 8-foot snake is not huge. I mean, that's in the realm of, you know, some of the like Brettles carpet pythons or scrub pythons, boa constrictors, some of these middle of the road snakes that everyone acknowledges achieve a certain size, but is a size that can really be managed for the most part by one person. And from my vantage point, I saw no reason why reticulated pythons needed to be shoved in that smaller category, when plenty of people keep boa constrictors and carpet pythons and do just fine with a snake that is that size. Might it not be the best first snake for somebody? You know, an argument could be made there, but then that's also not always the case. You know, I know people who've kept even more intense species as their first. They just did it right. You know, things like scrub pythons or Burmese pythons or whatever it might be within the snake world, you know, crebos and stuff like that. So I saw no reason why reticulated pythons needed to be, you know, why their potential for size needed to be lied about. And I think as soon as deception is called out, you kind of question what everything else you've been told that whole time. Okay, if I've been lied to about how small they stay, now what else have I been lied to about? And I think there's a bad trend that can start from that. Coupled with that came for a while lots of high drama and you know, just to call a spade, the retic market has always been a place of fairly high drama, but still remain true about this situation. And you know, people calling each other out, videos being made, explanations being made, excuses being made. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, I think we're in a day and age of, you know, actually this is the complete retic book pulled the rug out. I don't even know what that is completely referring to. I haven't read the book. So if you could elaborate on that, I would think that'd be really helpful for a lot of the people listening and even myself. I know that book put out a lot of new information, but I did not read it. So I'm not totally sure of what went down in that book, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. So nothing bad to say about the new retic book. But anyway, so just all of these things kind of coming together all at once, I think just bodes really poorly for a market, especially for somebody who isn't involved in it yet. There were a lot of people who were very frustrated by what they were charged early on for animals and kind of what that market ended up becoming a couple years later, which you can't fully fault the seller for that. They were reacting to the market at the time. You can't always fully fault the buyer as well. It is unfortunate when these kind of schemes occur within reptiles, where prices are really jacked up early on, particularly by a small group of people, and the marketing is just so good that it catches on. But then that can exist in certain markets. It can't exist in others. Like that can exist in ball pythons because the potential clientele for ball pythons is anybody who can keep a reptile. The potential clientele for reticulated pythons is greatly decreased based on just the physiology of those snakes. They have, not only are they larger than ball pythons, they have personalities, so to use that term, that are not always conducive for everybody. They have the most wild feeding response of probably any python, and while that is, to an experienced keeper, not really an issue, to an inexperienced keeper, that can be terrifying. So the explanation, okay, so saying certain morphs were locality specific ended up not being true. Exactly. Things like that. I know for a while, there was some morph that one of the big retic people was trying to say was like a Solayer originally, for the sake of just a little bit more, a slightly higher price tag. Maybe it was like titanium or something like that. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, these arbitrary, or like one of the main lines of Kalatoa retics is founded by undocumented stock. Like, wow, and that was revealed a couple of years ago and not refuted. Maybe, okay, probably Golden Child. So yeah, I think exactly. If you can bring forward evidence that a lineage that has been sold as a pure something, whatever, was founded on undocumented stock, I mean, that, oh my gosh, that throws everything out the window. And those animals, I've been around the market. I've had pure Kalatoas, and they've decreased in price significantly. It was just put in the live chat. I'm not going to put it on screen, but if you're seeing it, you Heartland Reptiles, you knew what I was talking about. But those animals were, $5,000-$6,000 a pair, 2019, 2020, and now maybe 2,000 a pair, with a lot more of them being produced as well. And I think that's what a lot of where a lot of the issues are coming from, is that a lot of the people who were getting into these snakes early on had full intentions of being breeders, and were probably already breeding other species, and they saw these as a great opportunity to get into a new project or work with a snake that they had wanted to. Back to my original point of always being fascinated with reticulated pythons. Now they feel like they can, because they've been functionally shrunken down to a smaller size. And the snake that they had spent $10,000 on in 2 years, that same snake as a baby is worth $1,500. And that's not an exact number, but I'm just using it as an example. It's, that's going to upset some people. And it's also tie back into a point I was making on ball pythons, is going to lead to collection dumping. And that to me is just, it's super unfortunate for any market. So now not only do you have babies that are in the market every single year, now you have all of these adult animals as well that are flooding the market, and just inevitably the prices are going to drop. Not only reticulated python wise, but with a lot of different species. And I'll talk about another couple here in a second, but I'll start on retics to finish it off. Price gouging is, in my opinion, just bad every way you can look at it with reptiles. And the immediate flip side to that would be to say, that's just supply and demand. That's what the market's calling for at the time. If you can get your money for this snake, get your money. Absolutely. But realize the potential consequences of that. Another species that was heavily price gouged were Boland's pythons. But to stay on the retic topic for at least another minute or so, these new snakes are brought out. There's new combinations, new different sizes of this is a albino golden child, whatever that a few years ago that would have been a snake that would have been a monster, but now you can get this snake and it's only going to be 7 feet as an adult, 6 feet maybe some of the people would say that are kind of trying to stretch the truth a little bit. Well, in a new market, in a market of morphs, and a market where people are going to be breeding these animals, those prices are going to fall inevitably. And with anything like that, prices are going to fall over time. And the name of the game is staying ahead of the curve, producing new morphs. That is what it is. But when the price is set at a high point, which is significantly higher than what it probably should be, the crash is going to be harder. It's going to be faster. That bottom point is going to be the bottom point within a little bit of a wiggle room. That top end is going to be the one that's variable depending on who is setting that top end. But the fall is far more dramatic when you're starting at such a high end. And another thing that I think the green tree python and emerald tree boa market does really well is they've kind of always been the same. The super high end green tree pythons that sell for like 10 grand plus, those are few and far between. They're definitely out there. They're produced every year, but they've earned that price tag. They weren't just slapped that price tag arbitrarily. Those snakes have been that expensive for decades. And the middle of the pack for those snakes has been the middle of the pack for a long time, of like a $1,500 to $3,000 snake. I don't know who you are. I don't care who you are. If you're making that much on a snake, you've had a great day. That's wonderful. If you're breeding snakes full-time, part-time, whatever you're doing, if you're selling a snake for $1,500 to $3,000, you've had yourself a great day. And the issues come when they want to take that 3,000, make it 4,500, make it 5,000, take advantage of areas in the market where it allows for that little bit of wiggle room. The issue there being in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, when be it circumstances of the world around you or the market or where production has gotten to with that species, once that catches up, the price is going to start to drop. And then the people who were in on the high end are now bitter. They're upset about them losing out on their investment. They're potentially going to dump their collections. And the people who didn't buy at that high level are seeing the price decrease, and they're thinking to themselves, well, how much lower is it going to go? If this snake that I wanted 3 years ago, that was $7,500, I couldn't have afforded it. I probably could have bought some of the ingredients to make it, but I just didn't at the time. It wasn't right for me. Okay, now it's 3 years later. That same snake is $2,000. Wow, I'm very grateful I didn't purchase that snake when it was significantly more money. But now, what's it going to be in a year from now? Is that thing going to be $1,000 in a year from now? Is it going to be $1,500? Like, if I just keep my patience, what's the lowest point at which I can get this snake that I've been eyeing for years now? And that's the last thing you want your potential customer to be thinking is, how much longer do I have to ice this guy out before he gives a snake to me cheaper? But rightfully so. If you're the customer in that situation, you're going to want to wait because you want to get the most bang for your buck. You want to get the snake at the most inexpensive point you can. This ties back into my previous solo show I did about scarcity. And when that scarcity is gone, when that appeal, that kind of mystique, once you peel back that curtain, it's really only down from there. I think with the retic market, we've seen a lot of that happen. We've seen people get out. We've seen, the buzz around it is not nearly what it used to be. And I take no pleasure in saying this. But I think it's a good lesson for all of us to learn, an example for us to kind of study, as far as, a lesson to be learned for the future. I personally think if a lot of these snakes were, priced at a rate that was more sustainable in the long run, and that coupled with transparency and truthfulness about what you're actually selling, I think that can't be overstated as to the impact that being caught up in a lie will have on your marketing. I think it led to a downfall that is pretty unfortunate. Another species that is not nearly as produced in captivity as retics. I mean, not even remotely close. That experienced a pretty major price gouge and then decrease was the white-lipped python. So all of those kind of rare pythons, whether it be white-lips or Timors or Savus or whatever it may be, they seem to be very cyclical in their popularity. And I think a lot of that has to do with whoever might be the one kind of spearheading the movement at the time, and how much visibility there is on them. But then the other factor that isn't involved with markets like ball pythons, reticulated pythons, carpet pythons, crested geckos, is that majority of the supply is coming from wild-caught animals. And these countries like Indonesia have their export quotas every year that are constantly changing, and demand from other markets, particularly the Asian market, is always changing as well. So the US market, we're not really sure how many of these animals are going to hit the States every year. And those down years can go one of two ways. So let's say 1 year, I don't know, arbitrary number, 40 southern white-lipped pythons enter the country. And there's a lot of people talking about them. Oh, these things are really cool. I'm seeing them at shows. People who I know are posting that they're acquiring these animals. I'm interested in these now. Let's see that following year hits, 0 quota, for example's sake. And now that full year can go one of two ways. Following a year of kind of like a bit more hype on them, then that's probably going to be the year of that tension building of, oh man, I missed out on the white-lips when they were here. Gosh, I wish I could get my hands on them. The next time an importer gets white-lipped pythons, I'm definitely getting those white-lipped pythons no matter what. And then the following year hits, now the quota is 15. Another, again, arbitrary number. Well, these importers and these flippers, they know that, and they know how much demand there is. They've probably been getting messages about these animals on a somewhat regular basis. So now, instead of selling these southern white-lipped pythons for $800 for pairs, now they're selling for $2,000 for pairs because they know that demand has grown significantly. They sell out of them that year. Everyone who was waiting for their white-lipped pythons bought their white-lipped pythons, and they're super happy. Well, now they've reached this tier of being, now they're $2,000 for the pair. And that is immediately going to discourage a significant amount of the potential buyers from even considering these snakes anymore, because I'm like, okay, they've reached this new level of the market that's out of my price range, or not something I want to spend on a wild caught animal that, I can never fully guarantee will make it. If the animal doesn't make it, I'm not getting my money back. The risk goes up significantly. Not something I'm interested in anymore. And now we're waiting out the rest of the year until the new quotas get issued. People stop talking about them. Now the demand is down. The following year, now people who got the first round of white-lipped pythons are breeding their white-lipped pythons. More imports are coming in. Let's say there's 20 this year, just to use round numbers. So the 20 imports come in, but now there are 3 clutches, and now there are 30 babies available as well. So now you went from 15 that sold at $2,000 a piece to 50 available the next year. And now you've had the new standard of pricing set. Captive bred animals, especially when it comes to species like this, they should always be more valuable than the wild caught imports. So now those captive bred animals are priced at $2,500 a pair, and the imports now maybe go back down to $1,500 a pair. So, which is great for the reason that now there are more animals available. There's more captive bred stock in the US. There's unrelated lineages coming in from these wild caught imports. for the sake of these snakes and for the sake of the longevity of the species, this is a phenomenal year, and everyone's super happy about it. But now, without proper marketing, without telling people how much you love these animals, without showing your passion for these animals, with just relying on the snakes to sell themselves, which snakes don't really do that well overall. Now the client base sees this huge amount of these animals available, and they think to themselves, well, they're like, oh, wow, okay, cool. Let me keep an eye on this. They check back a week later, nothing sold. They check back a week later, nothing sold. You know, a month goes by. Of those 50 animals, 4 of them have sold, and the customer will say, hey, well, these animals aren't worth $2,500. They're not selling at $2,500. And now the market has stagnated. Just when the market should have blown up, now that there are an abundance of animals available, not only just available, but captive bred animals available, this should be the year they were all waiting for. But without proper promotion in the meantime, without keeping that excitement, without, you know, keeping that tension high, you're not gonna have that same excitement as you did in that year when they weren't available at all, which is really kind of oxymoronic, but it is true, and it's what we're working with. I think it was 22. If someone remembers, correct me if I'm wrong, but there were some white-lipped pythons that were brought in, and they were priced at like $4,000 to $5,000 a pair for like big wild caught animals. And mind you, yes, yeah, Tim nailed it around the head. If you don't have a scrub, I don't know what you're waiting for. That is a true statement. I think this guy can also relate to that as well, Mr. Brandon Wheeler. What's going on? So when I saw those come in, and they sold too, they didn't sit. Those animals sold. That was the year what I was describing of nothing was available. The new ones come in, and they were priced at such an astronomical level. I'm like, this is going to be really bad in a couple of years. And 2000? Well, I wasn't too up on the reptile market in 2000. I bet it wasn't 2000. Year 2000. Oh, well, I was learning how to crawl, so I wasn't too up on the reptile market come back in 2000. But anyway, sorry, got a little sidetracked there. When I saw how expensive those animals were that came in that sold, I'm like, this only leads one place, is down. And as soon as the next ones comes in that can't be sold at that extreme price, yeah, long-term captive animals, 3,000 a piece. It's just not sustainable, because the next time that those come in, those people who bought them at that high point, which is a very small amount of people who are going to, okay, all right, 2020. Okay, so that makes sense. Yeah. 2020 for the white lip crisis. But the next round that come in, those people who bought them at $3,000 a piece, they have their snakes. They're not buying them again. And the people who still wanted those snakes, they're not going to spend that kind of money. So the next round of imports that come in, those prices are going to go down. And like I was saying, you keep decreasing, that market only goes one way. More animals are available, the prices keep going down. Sales are obviously struggling because of how we promote snakes these days, which I'll get into in a little bit, because I think there's the way that reptiles are promoted for sale these days caused this issue for us. It was just an inevitable boiling point for that market. Another market that was just, I mean, brutalized and by how they were treated back during COVID times, were that of Boelen's pythons, where when I was first really getting heavy into some of the more obscure python species, Boelen's pythons had just increased in price to about $5,000 a pair. Listen to that again. for a lot of the people who are newer here, this was probably 2017. They had increased in price to $5,000 for pairs, not for individuals, for pairs, meaning that they were less the year prior and the year before that. And that was like, wow, I can't believe they're this expensive now. Fast forward 2 to 3 years later, one particular YouTuber whose ego couldn't fit in my house starts getting their hands on Boelen's pythons and realize how shiny they are on cameras and how great they do on YouTube videos, and decides that they're $10,000 a piece now. And people bought them. People bought them during COVID, and then more got brought in and sold at that incredible price. And now you don't really see as many Boelen's pythons around, but you also don't see as many selling. And that's terrifying, especially considering that captive bred animals are out there now and available to anybody who would want them. What really should have happened if the Boelen's pythons were going to keep increasing is slowly increase that price of the wild caught animals as the demand is there. Fill me in on who that was. It's somebody who they're in the Northeast, if that's going to help you out at all. But then the goal of these wild caught animals inevitably always being for the captive bred population to become established. When that's not emphasized at all, when you are at a price point to where if anyone can't afford a $10,000 snake, the chance of them being able to afford 2 $10,000 snakes is not very high. So that's it's discouraging people from buying pairs. It's discouraging breeding in the future. Yes. Okay. It was figured out in the chat who I was talking about. Thank you guys very much. So the goal of this should have been keep increasing the prices of these imports incrementally, make sure they're all selling, make sure they're going to good people who will actually do something with them. And then when the captive bred ones are produced, now maybe they get raised up to $10,000 a pair for these pristine, perfect captive bred specimens that are like the cream of the crop. This is what we've been working for this whole time. To be in a position where captive bred Boelen's pythons are selling for less than wild caught ones did at one point is just a failure of the reptile industry to self-regulate, and has nothing to do with the people who are breeding these Boelen's pythons. They unfortunately are just kind of they're a victim of circumstance, and I don't want to say they're a victim of anything, but if they had it their way, I would have to assume that that they wouldn't have operated the way that these particular people who were selling these Boelen's pythons that were wild caught did. And then it creates this kind of stalemate market. These will always be snakes that are extremely valuable, extremely sought after. They are, goes without saying, some of the most beautiful snakes in the entire world. I've been very lucky to interact with a few Boelen's pythons. Never kept them myself, primarily because of how expensive they are. And they're worth it. They're worth being a snake that is extremely valuable. But as someone who's managing a market, you need to do better about creating the sustainability. That snake should never reach a point where demand even is, and I'm not even going to say it's caught up to supply. It most certainly has not. But where you could even have that conversation, where you could even consider, wow, has the Boelen's market peaked? Like that should never be a thought that someone even has. The same way, like no one's going to ever say, oh, I think the Northern Emerald tree boa market has just peaked. Impossible. No, maybe in 30 years, like based on how that market has been managed by the people who are involved, that is a market that has been set up for success for decades to come. And that is the failure of markets like Boelen's pythons and reticulated pythons, is to create that long-time sustainability. So let's see, I feel like I had another good topic here. Oh, yes, another one that I feel like to me kind of ties in the whole price gouging conversation, kind of put a pin on it, were captive bred croc monitors. So for people who haven't experienced croc monitors, they are without a doubt one of the most exceptional reptiles on the entire planet. They are, aside from crocodilians, I would probably say the most intelligent reptile on the planet. And just, I mean, the world will not be the same without croc monitors. They were a species kind of like Bowen's pythons, where they've been bred a couple of times ever. A couple of zoos got it. A couple of private keepers got it here and there. But you know, the goal, the mystical goal was always the captive bred croc monitor. And some private keepers got clutches, the eggs didn't hatch, such and such and such. And then a couple of years ago, we finally hit it. I say we, it wasn't really me. I was actually very fortunate to be in person when Chris Foley was hatching out his first and second clutch of croc monitors. Seeing baby croc monitors come out of the egg it was as special as you can get. I mean, I'd seen baby croc monitors. I hadn't seen baby croc monitors that were half the size of what I thought a baby croc monitor was. But fortunately and unfortunately, based on how some people and you know, I'll give credit to Chris. This was not Chris's doing. Kind of, he was unfortunately part of the fallout of it, and not entirely, but there are a few clutches were hit in the same year, where now we went from no captive bred croc monitors ever to an abundance of them, relatively speaking. I mean, probably less than 10 available, but 10 more that had ever been available before, to where these imported baby croc monitors were selling for $6,000, $5,000 a piece. Animals that are definitely worth it. I mean, those animals are as special as you can get. But one person, and like I said, not Chris, who produced these, realized what the market potential could have been for those animals, and decided to, and I believe my number is right here, but decided to put his babies at $15,000 a piece. I mean, I'd be really pressed to know if there is a $15,000 monitor lizard in the world. I mean, you know, maybe if a Komodo dragon was able to be retailed, or you know, something crazy, or if a Varanus keithorni made it to the, you know, outside of Australia. Like, that's not the market. Monitor lizards are valuable lizards. I mean, typically speaking, for captive bred monitor lizards, you're looking at like $1,000 to $5,000 a piece. And like I was saying earlier, nobody should ever be upset about selling an animal for $1,000 to $5,000. If you sell an animal for $5,000 and you think that you didn't get enough money for it, fuck you. Like, that's crazy to think that wouldn't be enough for somebody. And I'd rather sell that animal at $5,000 for the next 10 years than sell it for $20,000 once, and then in 2 years be selling it for $1,500 a piece. I mean, you know, that's just Tim, I believe that he was one of the guys who got eggs but didn't actually hatch them, and then he produced maybe a hybrid that was probably just a water monitor. But there's a lot of controversy about that. Anyway, though, so this $15,000 croc monitor, again, like the $10,000 Bowen's python, like the whatever else, sets a terrible precedent, because the amount of people who are willing to spend $15,000 on a croc monitor are, I mean, probably you can count them on one hand. And that one animal sold at $15,000. So everyone knew this is ridiculous. I'd always thought that a captive bred croc monitor should be $7,500. And because truly the wild caught or the farmed baby imports, they're not quite what the captive bred ones are, but they're not that far off. They're the same animal. They're a resilient animal. And if you get them at that young age, you can work with them and they can be very sociable animals. So the step up from the imported babies to the captive bred was not significant enough to triple the price. If it was the case, if you bought a captive bred baby croc monitor and the chances of it living past another month were 40%, okay, that captive bred animal might actually be worth triple what that import is. You know, if it was like a Nile monitor or Savannah monitor, okay, that's a different story. But with that said, part of the reason why Nile monitors and Savannah monitors are as inexpensive as they are is because they have a pretty poor track record with captivity. A lot of that has to do with how they're sold to people that aren't ready for them and don't know how to take care of them, don't know how to treat them for parasites, don't know how to feed them proper diets. People be feeding their Savannah monitors, you know, rats and stuff, and killing this primarily insectivorous lizard very quickly, but that's besides the point. So these croc monitors, they're very valuable for a reason, but the step up from that imported baby to that captive bred baby is not enough to justify that sort of price increase. And for anybody who isn't in that very upper echelon of someone who wants to spend $15,000 on a croc monitor, they'll be like, wow, I really wanted that captive bred one, but I can buy 3 of these imported babies for the same price that are functionally almost the same exact animal. And that's what they're going to do. So now these captive bred ones are just sitting there, and not all of them. You know, some of them were sold in the range of what I've thought coming into it was probably the appropriate price, and rightfully so. And if those animals get produced again and are priced at a similar level, I bet they'll sell just as easily as those first ones did. But you get that $15,000 animal, you sell it once, you never sell it again. They start selling it $7,000 or $8,000 a piece, and now you've manufactured a market crash where one did not exist to begin with. You have manufactured a visual market crash that did not happen, and you have decreased the value of your animals immediately just because you decided to price gouge one time, make an extra $5,000 off of one animal, and now you've created this downward trajectory that is not happening. But someone looking from the outside in doesn't know that's not happening. They think, oh, wow, captive bred croc monitors are crashing fast. I'm not going to buy yet. I'm going to wait to see what happens. If those animals that were $5,000 of the imports were elevated to 7 to 8, it's a modest increase when you're talking about an animal that's that valuable. And with something like a captive bred croc monitor that has really never been seen before, that's a very justifiable increase that more people are going to buy at that level. And then once they sell out, if you produce more the next year, maybe mark them up another $500. Create that subtle uptick in the market, sell those animals to good people for a good price, and create yourself a sustainable market. I'm a little out of the loop with monitors right now. I haven't seen any captive bred croc monitors being produced, probably in the last year or so. But I'd be curious to see what those animals end up being priced at once they're back into the market. And I hope that initial price gouge doesn't hurt them in the long run. But if it does, that would really suck. But I think we can all use this as an example of what you could do wrong. Another price gouge that occurred, and I'll only briefly touch on this, a few years ago, was that of Moluccan scrub pythons, where they were produced for the first time in the U.S. in quite a while. Pretty good sized clutch, great animals. I have one in my collection now, but at first they were put up at like $10,000 a piece. And this is an animal that is in super high demand. Everyone wants their Moluccan scrub pythons for good reason. They're, arguably, in my opinion, the coolest snake in the entire world. But the previous ones that were sold as imports were about $1,500 a piece. And the only reason why that market survived that incredible price gouge, in my opinion, is that the availability just didn't happen again, that they weren't produced again. The same breeder didn't produce them again. Imports stayed at almost zero. Last year, a very small amount were brought in, and I think they all sold, and for a good price as well. Yeah, Ryan, I wish I was around when Classos were 150 a piece. That I would have had a freaking million of them. So that was like an example of a market surviving a price gouge. And they didn't sell at that level either. They sold at a more reasonable price at the end, but not publicly, behind closed doors. It would have been nice for that price to be public, because then it would have given the perception of the market increasing at a steady, sustainable, reasonable pace. But again, with that said, it didn't have any long-term ramifications because the supply stayed at very close to zero following that. Another example, just for the sake of it, I'll go through it quick, of not quite a price gouge, but an overreaction to demand that occurred, was that of the Bell's phase lace monitor. So these are, lace monitors, for anyone who, is a newer keeper. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they were the holy grail of lizards. Absolutely. It was, a couple of people somehow got them into their collections. Some made it over from Europe, and the pipe dream was to be able to get your hands on a lace monitor, particularly the Bell's phase lace monitor. They hit the States more. They were being produced. They were getting sold. People were getting their founding stock. They just so happen to be a monitor lizard that is not extremely hard to breed if you're doing it right. And during COVID, particularly the Bell's phase became a really hot ticket item. So they were being bred, they were being sold, and same kind of happened with like a lot of water monitors, like with black dragons and stuff like that. They were produced to such a point where you start driving your own market down because you have oversupplied it. And especially with those particular lizards, how not all Bell's phase lace monitors are created equal. The less perfect phenotypically, so to speak, the ones that have kind of more muddied out yellow, they weren't crisp, cream and black lizards. I mean, the demand plummeted significantly on those, to where, in my opinion, if that market had been if they played the long game with it a little bit more, maybe you don't hatch out all the eggs that you have, or maybe you don't breed that female that extra time. You only, you limit yourself to 50% of your potential production, but you sustain your ability to sell those by years and years and years by not having so many all at once. And then subsequently, because the Bell's phase were bred so much, what we call normal phase, which I don't like that term for them, became almost non-existent. And now those are the ones that are in high demand, which is, to me, kind of like ironic, considering that they are, I think they're better. I like them better personally. I love Bell's phase as well, but I think that the normals are nicer looking. But we might be sitting here in 5 years saying the opposite of, now the normal lace are everywhere where I can't find a Bell's phase. I think if that market was kind of taken at a bit of a more reasonable pace, sure, the demand is there, it's very high, but as we've seen from some of these examples, if you fill that demand too quickly, if you put those animals in everyone's hands, if you take away that mystique, take away that scarcity, your market is going to hit a wall kind of quick. So anyway, that's, off of that topic, onto my next one, referring to my notes. I guess it flows well about, not letting a project go so quick. An example of a project that I think a lot of us should really, look at as an example is that of the palmetto corn snake. Don Soderberg was the one who was heading up that project, saw that this snake is going to revolutionize the corn snake world. But it is a corn snake, and corn snakes are easy to breed. They're prolific. They're all of these things. So depending on how he managed that project, he could have tanked it instantly, but he didn't. He produce them at a more moderate rate, and he would only let, I believe at first it was only het males go. It was a very slow trickle out of the collection, and that did a lot of things. One, it created that sustainability for that market where, okay, here's this new morph, and then it's not like next year there's 100 of them available, and you're not buying females. If you're making your own, you're getting this one, you're outcrossing it, you're either making hets or you're making pos hets, you're keeping them back, you're doing all that work, you're working as hard as Don did to produce them. And because of that, those animals stayed at a higher price point, the demand stayed there, that scarcity stayed there, the mystique stayed there, and they're still one of the more valuable corn snakes. But now they're finally at a price point that is more of like a pet level, kind of like pied ball pythons. They probably will always be a little bit more expensive than others, just because they're so beautiful and they're, you know, very appealing to the pet audience. But the amount of attrition that happened in that project over the course of, I mean, I don't know, 15 years or even longer than that, is the rate of attrition that some projects go through in 2 years or 3 years. So, you know, and could Don have made a lot more money in years 1 through 5 than he did in those years? Yeah, probably. But would he have made the same amount of money in 15 years that he did, you know, in a subsequent 15 where he pushed so many out the door right away? I mean, absolutely not. And obviously, you know, when we talk money and stuff like that, obviously this isn't all about the money, and you know, it's hard to have these conversations when you're talking about animals. But unfortunately, there is an economic side to this industry, and I think sometimes the balancing act of hobby and business isn't struck the best way, especially on the business side. So we need to continue to treat these animals as they truly are, but also have a bit more business sense when it comes to it for the sustainability of the market, which inevitably, the way that I look at it, especially with the right people, with the right message, will actually be better for the animals overall as well. And this is exactly the point. Yeah, they shouldn't have been getting into animals anyway, but unfortunately, we can't always prevent that from happening. So I'm gonna take a quick drink of water before I get into my next rant. And then, so yeah, it's Brandon. That's great to hear that carpet pythons are up right now. That is, that's great for all of us. It's great for carpet people, but it's great for the market as a whole to, you know, to have a market like that having an increase. So that's wonderful. A project that hasn't boiled over quite yet, that will absolutely very soon. And we're gonna harbor back, or you know, we're gonna get back onto the retic topic. Unfortunately, I'm not trying to bash retics. They give a lot of good examples. Is the ocelot reticulated python, and incredible snake, beautiful morph, looks nothing like anything else that had been bred within reticulated pythons, and especially with, you know, not having imports, we're not getting new morphs. To have like the last true new morph being introduced into the hobby created a lot of buzz, and rightfully so, because those snakes are incredible looking. But take the palmetto example of how they were slowly released, how they were managed very meticulously. The people, and one person in particular who was heading up this ocelot retic project, were vocal about how they were getting out of the industry as well at the same time, which I found very convenient. People were buying at the high, and there was a lot of hype around these animals. The first combos are being produced, and they're incredible looking. And a lot of newer keepers were being sold these ocelot and head ocelots. Well, they're all from the same clutches. They're all from the same, you know, productions. They're all the same age. So these are all going to be sexually mature at the same time, bred by lots of different people. So that market will go very quickly from really one source, maybe a couple that are also working with the one source, to 20 sources. And as we know about retics, especially mainlands, they have very big clutches, and the market is limited, like we were saying earlier, based on the size of these animals. If this was a ball python morph, if there was the ocelot ball python and they look the same, did the same thing, we would be looking at a very different situation. We might even be looking at a revitalization of part of that market. So the vehicle in which this new mutation is moving in is going to be a major problem that it's in a reticulated python. And inevitably people will try to breed them into the super dwarf, and as they should, and it's not a bad thing. I hope that does happen, but lots of mainland ocelots will be produced that are 100% mainland, or with this morph or that morph or the other morph, and these were selling for 5 figures. Het pairs were selling for 5 figures. This was a big deal. As soon as there are 300 of these available in a year, I mean, I'd love to be wrong. I'm not trying to predict a bad time for the retic market, but this is the recipe for a project to go haywire. And I guess we'll see, but kind of the juxtaposition of that next to the palmetto corns, if only het males were let go, or het pairs, or a visual male here, a visual male there, maybe the next generation, the original breeder, and 2 or 3 other people will be breeding them as well. Hopefully in the meantime, all those people did their due diligence to promote those animals, to build the excitement, to bring new people in. And now you actually have a market that's ready to go from 1 supplier to 3 suppliers. If you're going from 1 supplier to 20 suppliers, and of those new 20, only 1 or 2 of them are actually doing the work to market themselves and market those animals, you're going to be in a rough spot where now you have this extreme overabundance very quickly, and the immediate watering down of this market. Immediately people see the prices going down. They wonder how long they have to wait until they get theirs. And now, especially with reticulated pythons, not only is there this oversupply, now there's a ton of giant snakes. They need somewhere to go. And that creates a whole other topic that I'm not really going to get into. But with retics, that's a very real thing. So, I think we should all kind of use that as a bit of an example of, of how not to manage that type of situation. And before I get into kind of my last couple of topics, another thing that I meant to bring up earlier, just kind of was flowing with the topic. There's lots of people are breeding lots of different species, and it's great, but and I think a lot of this comes down to just life circumstances, so you can't fully fault people, but lots of breeders rely on others to essentially sell their animals for them, and not in a way of I breed, I sell to somebody else, and then now they have their customer base. Whereas I breed, I breed Mexican pine snakes, and there are people that are breeding Mexican pine snakes that are very vocal about their Mexican pine snakes. They are, on YouTube and on podcasts, and they're posting on social media. They're promoting these snakes. Me, I'm sitting back being like, they're doing their job. They're doing my job as well. They're promoting these animals. I don't need to do that anymore. I'll wait to produce them, and then they've created the market. So I'll just mark my animals 15% below theirs, and they're going to sell because the demand has been created. Shoot, if that's your approach, I hope you just stop breeding reptiles. To think that to rest on your laurels of having somebody else promote your animals for you, for one, who could think that anything good's going to come out of that? And I mean, that kind of passive mindset, people do it all the time. And I don't understand. And what just happens is that that's another factor that creates markets, or that causes markets to go down. Because if I'm breeding Mexican pine snakes, and this guy who is the Mexican pine snake guy is breeding theirs as well, somebody is in the market for Mexican pine snakes, they're very clearly going to go to this person who they are familiar with first. But if mine are $100 cheaper, okay, then that's where I can gain my leverage in this scenario, is by having a better price on similar animals. Well, as soon as those first ones start selling, now I've created the new market standard for those animals, and we've created a market that is starting to go down. But if I had taken the fairly minimal amount of time that it takes to promote myself to where when that species is discussed, you have this guy who's known as the guy for these Mexican pine snakes. You also have me, and my name is in the ring as well. And I'm not that guy, but I'm known well enough. I don't need to undercut the well-known breeder, because enough people have eyes on my animals. And, to me, the perfect scenario is they get one from this breeder, one from me. Now unrelated lineages are out there. People are aware of these animals. They want to continue breeding them with a species. Like, I just use this as an example because I looked to my left and I saw them. But this is an animal that is a Mexican species, and we are not getting hardly ever wild-caught exports out of Mexico. So longevity of genetics, longevity of these lineages is very important. When all this is recognized by the community at large surrounding these animals, it not only benefits the keepers present and future, it benefits the animals as well. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. If you are breeding something, it is on you to market yourself, market your animals. And you're not only marketing yourself, you're marketing the collective of that market. You are pushing that forward. When people like Brandon or like TJ Chambers or like Riley or all these other carpet breeders, and Nick Muttons of the world, when they're all collectively talking about their carpet pythons, that high tide raises all ships. NPR is one of the big reasons why carpet pythons have a pretty good, stability within the reptile industry. There's just people that are always constantly talking about their animals, promoting their animals. And with the carpet python guys, it's really never about how you can make this next morph or you can do this or that. It's really about why they love their carpet pythons. And I think that has shown in perpetuity with how that market has created sustainability. They're not price gouging. They're not going crazy, except for those people who they talked about in that episode a couple of months ago. But again, perfect example of a community rallying together to call somebody out who is doing something that will hurt everybody in the long run. So, kudos to MJ, Riley, and Brandon for doing that podcast and for calling those guys out. Kind of the last thing that I'll talk about on here is not fully it's a criticism of a behavior pattern in selling snakes, particularly when it comes to morph market. And this is not a criticism of morph market itself. It's a criticism of how people use morph market. I've used morph market both as a buyer and a seller. I think it's a great platform. I've been using it since the day it came out. So I'm not shit talking morph market. I want to just get that clear to begin with. But it's a very valuable resource that can be used for good and for your detriment. So when I use morph market as like my yardstick of pricing for anything. If I want to know what to price an animal at, I just go to morph market and I see kind of what the average of what's available on there is. And then if there isn't anything available, which is kind of best case scenario, then you look at similar animals and then you price them a little bit higher because now the demand is inevitably there because they're not available and the supply is really low. So it's a great resource to use on how to price your animals. But what some people will do is use Morph Market as just their, I'm going to throw this up here and then I'll wait for a message to come, whether it comes in a day or a month and a year. This animal's going to sit on here until it sells. And I'm not going to use any other means of trying to sell this animal. So, I don't know. I mean, where's the incentive to buy an animal that's been sitting somewhere for 6 months for sale that clearly hasn't moved, and the price has probably gone down a little bit here and there? It's sitting on a page with a bunch of other animals that are similar to it that are also not selling. Why would one keep that there? Why would you keep that animal up on that page when it's not selling and it's actively hurting the market that you are trying to capture? People have explained to me in the past, when I was coming up, I had mentors explain how they kind of do their sales, where they'll put up an animal for sale, and if it doesn't sell in a little bit, they'll drop the price maybe minimally. And then if it goes for a bit longer, they take down the ad and they'll put it up for sale 6 months later. Well, you don't sell that animal for that 6 month period. And you're like, well, what if I could make that sale in the meantime? If you were going to sell that animal the way you wanted to, you wouldn't even have to put it up on that website to begin with. And if you did, you would have sold that animal in the first week. I personally would encourage people who use sites like Morph Market. Let's even also put king snake fauna in the mix. They're kind of a little more, obsolete these days, or used by specific communities. Like, the venomous community is strong on fauna, but some others, like for ball pythons, you don't ever think to go on fauna for a ball python. So if you use these resources, don't just let your ads sit there forever. Have them up for a brief period of time, take them down, post up your ad, and then also post on social media that you've posted this ad up on Morph Market. Don't just rely on Morph Market to bring that traffic to you, because it inevitably will. But if you bring that traffic to you on Morph Market, you're also bringing that to everyone else who's on Morph Market as well, selling the same exact animal you're selling. And now you've opened yourself up to that person who's selling the same snake for $100 less, even $50 less, when you brought the customer there. So by using a site like that in long-term perpetuity, where you always have your animals available, you always have your pricing public, you are showing people that these animals are potentially not selling, you are bringing eyes to your competition. I just don't get it. I don't get it. I think Morph Market's a great resource, but I think if you use it to your best advantage, it's very advantageous. But if you are relying on it to be the means of your sales, you are hurting yourself, not only in the short term, but in the long term as well. I don't know. I think for every post of something that's available, I mean, you should have 10, 20, 30 posts that are for the sake of promotion of just the animal itself purely. I mean, I don't know. The way I see it, many more sales are created by posts that are not animal for sale than posts that are animal for sale. So if you find yourself with a lot more for sale than this is what I'm working with, this is what I'm doing with it, this is my enclosure, this is whatever, you're setting yourself up for short-term success maybe, but long-term probably some heartache and some struggles. One person who I think does this brilliantly is Dan Maliri, DM Exotics. I don't think Dan uses Morph Market. He has a website that he posts all of his stuff on, which is a lost art in the reptile industry, but I don't have a website either, so I can't really talk. But if you are redirecting from a post to a website, or from a YouTube video to a website, only your animals are available on your website. You're not showing your ads next to 20 other ads. It's something that I think a lot of the old school guys who have websites just continue to use their websites to great avail as well. But if you're trying to convert sales from social media, I mean, shoot, you are so much better off going to a website where only your animals are available than where animals are available from dozens, potentially hundreds of other breeders. And Dan does great with his promotion. Everybody who knows about him knows about the videos where he is unpacking his shipments or showing animals over the farms that he's going to be bringing over. And, it's understood that these are animals that he is going to potentially sell. That's not how the videos are made. It's really, he does a great job of kind of that inference that this might be available, but I'm not telling you that. You're going to have to reach out and find out. And you might even need to join his Patreon in order to get first access to that animal. That's creating multiple layers of not only intrigue, but multiple places where that sale is going to occur. And it's also been created by his consistency with making those videos for years now about animals that are going to potentially be available. And there's a reason why you still see those videos, because it still works. It's a sustainable method. And not only is it conversions of sales from the videos, they're being forwarded to his website and to his Patreon, where again, you're not going to be bombarded with ads from other people, which is very important to show your animals in a way where you're not literally promoting your competition. Like I said earlier, pages like Morph Market and Fauna and King Snake, they're very useful resources, but you got to utilize them to their maximum potential. In my opinion, their maximum potential isn't letting an ad sit there for months and months and months and months. And don't overlook the impact of good photography and a good description of the animal, multiple images, description of parents, presentation on those sites matters as well. You can't just rely on the site existing and doing what it's supposed to do for you to make your sale. Just because you pay your membership fee, that doesn't guarantee you anything. You still have to do the work, still have to put the effort in. You still have to promote yourself, promote your animals, promote the community around you. And me saying having your animal for sale visibly where other people's animals aren't isn't to like put yourself over them or to push down your fellow breeders. It's to best promote yourself. But as a collective, we all need to, the phrase, high tide raises all boats is one that I believe in very much so. And it definitely exists in the reptile industry. It's, part of why the COVID boom happened is that there were a lot of people who were there ready to capitalize on an influx into the market. But we can't just stop there and expect it to continue. It needs to be continued. It needs to be, that plant needs to get watered every day, or, however often you feel like watering your plant. The reptile industry is not a cactus. So, lots of thoughts here. I think we're pretty much wrapping up. Shout out to everybody who watched live. I think this may have actually been my most watched live podcast. So I'm extremely grateful. It means a lot that people are willing to sit here and listen to me rant for, an hour and 40 minutes about something. If you guys like this format of the solo podcast, shoot me messages of topics you'd like to hear me talk about. I would do these more frequently if I had more things to talk about. So, please, please give me more suggestions. But yeah, I encourage everyone to promote themselves, not rely on anybody else to do it for them. And, yes, I've definitely heard this guy rant a lot. So maybe it's genetic. Maybe my ranting is a genetic trait. It's a dominant trait, not recessive. So, I feel like I'm going to kind of ramble a little bit here at the end, but it's not ruined. We're in a good spot. We've had a few things go down that have set us back a little bit, but they're not death blows. They're not terrible. It takes a bit of a a collective effort, a bit of a realization of errors, and then patience, ultimately patience. So filling the void that Brian has left behind, trying to do our best to fill those shoes and doing what's right by the animals. So with that said, I'll wrap up. Thank you to everybody who tuned in live. Thank you to everybody who is listening after the fact. If you are here on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, the Trap Talk Reptile Network. There's a new podcast every single day of the week by some of the best hosts in the game, doing this at the highest level, some of them for decades and decades. So the best information currently out there is here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network. If you are coming to us from the audio podcast platforms like Spotify or Apple Podcast, please give us a subscribe. A 5-star rating would be wonderful. Anyone feels inclined to share these episodes on social media, anything is greatly, greatly appreciated. So with all of that said, I really appreciate everyone for tuning in, listening to this conversation, and I'll see you back here next Wednesday and with a guest next Wednesday. Have a good night.